We will now proceed in arrangement with the British delegation on the presentation showing the individual responsibility of the defendant von Ribbentrop by Sir David Maxwell-Fyfe.
May it please the tribunal, if the tribunal would be good enough to look at Appendix A of the indictment on page 28 of the English text, they will find the particulars relating to the this defendant, and they will find that the allegations regarding him fall into three divisions. After reciting the offices which he held, the appendix of the indictment goes on to say, the defendant Ribbentrop used the foregoing positions, his personal influence and his intimate connection with the Führer, in such a manner that he promoted the accession to power of the Nazi conspirators as set forth in count 1 of the indictment. He promoted the preparations for war set forth in count 1 of the indictment. In the second section, he participated in the political planning and preparation of the Nazi conspirators for wars of aggression and wars in violation of international treaties, agreements, and assurances, as set forth in counts 1 and 2 of the indictment. In accordance with the Führer principle, he executed and assumed responsibility for the execution of the foreign policy plans of the Nazi conspirators set forth in count 1 of the indictment. And then the third section, he authorized, directed, and participated in the war crimes set forth in count 3 of the indictment and the crimes against humanity set forth in count 4 of the indictment, including more particularly the crimes against persons and property in occupied territories. I hope that it might be useful to the tribunal if I followed the order of these allegations in the indictment and collected the evidence for them on each of these in turn. I therefore proceed to deal first with the allegation that this defendant promoted the accession to power of the Nazi conspirators. The tribunal knows already that the defendant held various offices, and these are usefully collected in his own certified statement, which has already been put in as United States Exhibit 5, document 2829 PS. And I think it would be convenient if I very briefly explained the different activities and offices of the defendant which are dealt with in that list. It will be seen from that list that he became a member of the Nazi Party in 1932. But according to the semi-official statement in Das Archiv, he had begun to work for the party before that time. That semi-official statement goes on to say that he succeeded in extending his business connections to political circles, having joined in 1930 the service of the party. At the time of the final struggle for power in the Reich, Ribbentrop played an important, if not strikingly obvious, part in the bringing about of the decisive meetings between the representatives of the President of the Reich and the heads of the party who had prepared the entry of the Nazis into power on the 30th of January 1933. Those meetings, as well as those between Hitler and von Papen, took place in Ribbentrop's house in Berlin-Dahlem. This defendant was therefore present and active at the inception of the Nazi securing of power. After that, for a short period, he was advisor to the party on questions of foreign affairs. His title was first collaborator to the Führer on matters of foreign policy, and he later became representative for matters of foreign policy on the staff of the deputy. This was followed by membership of the Reichstag in November 1933, and in the party organizations he became an Oberführer in the SS and was subsequently promoted to Gruppenführer and to Obergruppenführer. Thereafter, he attained official government positions. On the 24th of April 1934, he was appointed delegate of the Reich government on matters of disarmament. That was after Germany had left the disarmament conference. And in this capacity, he visited foreign capitals. He was then given the more important and certainly more resounding title of German Minister Plenipotentiary at Large. And it was in that capacity that he negotiated the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935. In 1936, after the Nazi government had reoccupied the Rhineland, contrary to the treaties of Versailles and Locarno, the matter was brought before the Council of the League of Nations, and the defendant addressed the Council in defense of the action of Germany. His next position began on the 11th of August 1936, when he was appointed ambassador in London. He occupied that position for a period of some 18 months, and his activities there, while having their own interest, are not highly relevant to the matters now before the tribunal. But during that period, in the capacity which he still had of Minister Plenipotentiary at Large, he signed the original anti-Comintern Pact with Japan on November 1936, and also the additional pact by which Italy joined it in 1937. Finally, as far as this part of the case is concerned, on the 4th of February 1938, this defendant was appointed foreign minister in the place of the defendant von Neurath, and simultaneously was made a member of the Secret Cabinet Council, the Geheime Kabinettsrat, established by the decree of Hitler of that date. That takes us up to the period of his holding the office of foreign minister and his actions in that capacity will be dealt with in detail later on. I refer the tribunal, without reading further, because I've already summarized it, to the extract in Das Archiv, which is document D472, which I now put in as Exhibit GB 130, also to the membership extract of the SS, which consists in the examination of dissent of SS leaders. That I insert as Exhibit GB 131. Again, I shall not trouble the tribunal with the details. It shows his rank, which I've already mentioned. There's no question of any honorary rank. He's simply stated to be of the rank of Gruppenführer, and of course it gives his ancestry in detail in order to deal with the laws that related to that subject. It also deals with his adoption in order to secure the prefix of von, but the defendant has now to deal with much more serious things than barren controversies with the Almanac de Gotha. The only other document new document which I put before the tribunal on this part of the case is Exhibit GB 129, document 1337 PS, which shows the establishment of the secret cabinet council and the membership of the foreign minister. These are the activities of this defendant in the earlier part of his career, and in the submission of the prosecution, they show quite clearly that he assisted willingly, deliberately, intentionally, and keenly in the bringing of the Nazis into power and in the early stage of their obtaining control of the German state. I now come to the second allegation in the indictment, that this defendant participated in political planning and preparation with the Nazi conspirators for wars of aggression and wars in violation of international treaties, agreements, assurances. And again, it might help the tribunal if I took these quite shortly in order of aggression and stated briefly the constituent allegations that we make and the references to the matters before the tribunal, only referring the tribunal to any new documents which I shall come along. The first is the Anschluss with Austria, and there the tribunal will remember that the defendant Ribbentrop was present at the meeting at Berchtesgaden on the 12th of February 1938, at which Hitler and von Papen met the Austrian Chancellor von Schuschnigg and his foreign minister Guido Schmidt. The tribunal will find the official account of that interview in document 2461 PS, and which I put in as Exhibit GB 132. But the tribunal will find what I submit is the truthful account of the interview in Exhibit US 72, document number 1780 PS, which is the diary of the defendant Jodl, and the relevant entries are those for the 11th and 12th of February 1938. They are extremely short, and I think if the tribunal would be kind enough to allow me, they do show quite clearly what is the case for the prosecution, that is the pressure that was put on Chancellor Schuschnigg at the interview. There at the foot of the first page in the document book, 1780 PS is the number. And the 11th of February, the defendant Jodl writes, in the evening and on 12th February, General K, General Keitel, with General von Reichenau and Sperle at the Obersalzberg. Schuschnigg, together with G. Schmidt, are again being put under the heaviest political and military pressure. At 2300 hours, Schuschnigg signs the protocol. 13th February, in the afternoon, General Keitel asks Admiral Canaris and myself to come to his apartment. He tells us that the Führer's order is to the effect that military pressure by shamming military action should be kept up until the 15th. Proposals for these deceptive maneuvers are drafted and submitted to the Führer by telephone for approval. At 2:40 o'clock, the agreement of the Führer arrives. Canaris sent to Munich to the counterintelligence office 7 and initiates the different measures. The effect is quick and strong. In Austria, the impression is created that Germany is undertaking serious military preparations. It is rather interesting, after reading the frank statement of the defendant Jodl, to look at the pale words of the official statement, which I've also put in. But that is the view of the meeting with Schuschnigg, which the prosecution placed before this court. Will the tribunal be good enough to ignore an allegation that appears in the trial brief that this defendant visited Mussolini before the Anschluss? That is stated by a member of his staff at the time, but it is disputed by another member. Therefore, I'd rather the tribunal ruled it out. The next point on which there is no dispute is the telephone conversation which took place between the defendant Goering and the defendant Ribbentrop on the 13th of March 1938, when this defendant was still in London. The tribunal will remember that that was dealt with fully by my friend Mr. Alderman. It was passing on to Austria. Then we come to Czechoslovakia, and there you have an almost classic example of aggression at work in its various ways. Again, I simply remind the tribunal of the outstanding points with the greatest brevity. First, there is the question of stirring up trouble inside the country against which aggression is going to be set forth. This defendant, as foreign minister, was concerned in the stirring up of the Sudeten Germans under Henlein. And the contacts between the Foreign Office and Henlein are shown in United States exhibits 93, 94, 95, and 96. These are documents 3060 PS, 2789 PS, 2788 PS, and 3059 PS. They've all been read by my friend Mr. Alderman, but I simply give the tribunal the effect of them, which is they are documents stirring up the Sudeten German movement in order to act with the government of the Reich. Then After that, the defendant Ribbentrop was present on the 28th of May 1938 at the conference with Hitler, at which the latter gave the necessary instructions to prepare the attack on Czechoslovakia. That was dealt with previously on page 742 of the transcript, and I want to put before the tribunal document 2360 PS, which is a report of a speech of Hitler's in the Völkischer Beobachter, and if the tribunal would be good enough to look at it, it is a useful date to fix with regard to the aggression against Czechoslovakia, because that was the day on which Hitler, on his own proclamation, had decided that aggression was to take place against Czechoslovakia. The extract which I've taken is quite short, and if the tribunal would look at the end of the first, at the extract which says page 1, columns 5 and 6, bottom.
But have we got it in this we
yes,
go
it's
from
2360
178 to 2949.
It ought to be there as number 2360 PS.
Unless it's got out of order.
Oh, it's extremely short, my Lord.
Perhaps you'll read it.
I'll read it for the moment, and I'll see that copies are sent in case they've come out. The important passage is, on the basis of this unbearable provocation, which was still further emphasized by a truly infamous persecution and terrorizing of our Germans there, I have now decided to solve the Sudeten-German question in a final and radical manner. This was in January 1939. Then he goes on to say, on the 28th of May, I gave the order for the preparation of military steps against this state to be concluded by 2nd October. The important point is that it was on the 28th of May was the date when the foul grun for Czechoslovakia was the subject of orders and was thereafter put into effect to come to fruition at the beginning of October. That is the second stage, to lay well in advance your plans of aggression. The third stage is to see that the neighboring states are not likely to cause you trouble. So we find that on the 18th of July 1938, this defendant had a conversation with the Italian ambassador Attolico, at which the attack on Czechoslovakia was discussed. That is United States Exhibit 85, document 2800 PS, and there were further discussions which are contained in United States Exhibit 86 and 87, which are documents 2791 PS and 2792 PS. I think it's sufficient for me to say to the tribunal that the effect of these documents is that it was made clear to the Italian government that the German government was going to move against Czechoslovakia. The other country which was interested was Hungary, because Hungary had certain territorial ideas with regard to parts of the Czechoslovak Republic. So on the 23rd and 25th of August, this defendant was present at discussions and had discussions himself with the Hungarian politicians Imredi and Kanya. And these are found in the United States Exhibits 88 and 89, document 2796 PS and 2797 PS. This defendant endeavored to get assurances of Hungarian help, and the Hungarian government at the time was not too ready to commit itself to action, although it was ready enough with sympathy. These are to be found in the documents which I've mentioned, and again, unless the tribunal desire it, I shan't read any document that I summarize in that way. Now, I've already mentioned that there had been contact with the Sudeten Germans. That was the long-term grievance that had to be exploited. But the next stage was to have a short-term grievance and to stir up trouble, preferably at the fountainhead. And so, between the 16th and 24th of September, we find the German Foreign Office, of which this defendant was at the head, stirring up trouble in Prague. And that is shown very clearly in the United States Exhibits 97 to 101, which are documents 2858 PS, 2855 PS, 2854 PS, 2853 PS, and 2856 PS. I've read them in order of date. And it's interesting, if the tribunal would look at these, they ought to follow quite shortly the document they've just been looking at, beginning with 2758, see the sort of thing of which I am reminding the tribunal. There you have a document on the 19th of September coming from the Foreign Office to the German Embassy in Prague. Please inform Deputy Kunt at Konrad Henlein's request to get into touch with the Slovaks at once and induce them to start their demands. And the others deal with questions of arrest and the action that would be taken against any Czechs in Germany in order to make the position more difficult. That was the contribution which this defendant made to the pre-Munich crisis. As the tribunal will remember, on the 29th of September 1938, the Munich Agreement was signed. That's GB 23, document TC 23, which I've already read to the tribunal. And after that, I just remind the tribunal of an interesting document which shows the sort of action which the Wehrmacht expected, and the advice that the Wehrmacht expected from the Foreign Office. You have on the 1st of October, document C2, which is United States Exhibit 90, and that is a long document putting forward an almost infinite variety of breaches of international law which are likely to arise or might have arisen from the action in regard to Czechoslovakia, and on all these points the opinion of the Foreign Office is sought. That, of course, remained a hypothetical question at that time because no war resulted. Then the tribunal will remember there's the second...
Did you give us the number of that
Oh,
document?
yes, C2, my lord.
C2?
United States Exhibit 90. Then, if the tribunal please, we come to the second stage of the acquiring of Czechoslovakia. That is, having obtained the Sudetenland, arranging so that there would be a crisis in Czechoslovakia which would give an excuse for taking the rest. The tribunal will remember the importance of this because it is the first time that the German government went outside its own statement about not going beyond German blood. On that point, again, this defendant was active. On the 13th of March, as events were moving to a climax, he sent a telegram to the German minister, who of course in Prague, who was under him, telling him to make a point of not being available if the Czech government wants to get in touch with you in the next few days. That's United States Exhibit 116, document 2815. At the same time, he saw a delegation of pro-Nazi Slovaks in Berlin, and at a conference with Hitler at which this defendant was present, the Tiso, one of the heads of the pro-Nazi Slovaks, was directed to declare an independent Slovak state in order to assist in the disintegration of Czechoslovakia. That is a document, U.S. Exhibit 117, document 2802 PS, and the tribunal might care to compare it with a previous meeting with another Slovak, Čuka, a month before, which is shown in document 2790 PS, United States Exhibit 110. So that this defendant was assisting in the task, again, of causing internal trouble. Then, on the 14th of March, the next day, 14th of March 1939, Hácha, the president of Czechoslovakia, was called to Berlin. This defendant was present at the meeting, and the tribunal will remember the usual pressure and threats which resulted in the aged president purporting to hand over the Czechoslovak state to Hitler. The tribunal will find that subject dealt with on page 911 of the transcript, and the relevant exhibit is the United States Exhibit 118, document 2798 PS, which is the minutes of the meeting between Hitler and Hácha that this defendant attended. You will also find it dealt with in the United States Exhibit 126, 3061 PS, which is the Czechoslovakian government report. That was the end of the Czech part of Czechoslovakia. The following week, this defendant signed a treaty with Slovakia, which I now put in. It's document 1439 PS, and I put it in as Exhibit GB 135, and the important article is Article 2, under which the German government was given the right to construct military posts and installations and keep them garrisoned within Czechoslovakia. That is, the tribunal have the number 1439 PS, which I put in as GB 135. Again, I'm not going to read it at length, but I hope the tribunal will stop me if there are any of these documents which they would like read instead of summarized. In that way, this defendant, by the terms of that treaty, had, after completely finishing Bohemia and Moravia as an independent state, had got this military control in Slovakia. Before I pass to Poland, there is one interesting little point on the northern Baltic which I put before the tribunal to show how this defendant could hardly keep his hands out of the internal affairs of other countries, even when it didn't seem a very important matter. The tribunal will remember that on the 3rd of April 1939, as shown in GB 4, TC 53A, Germany had occupied the Memel land. It would have appeared that as far as the Baltic states were concerned, that the position was satisfactory. But if the tribunal will look at document 2953 PS, which I put in as exhibit GB 136, and document 2952 PS, which I put in as GB 137, they will find that this defendant, acting in close concert with the conspirator Heydrich, who is dead, was stirring up trouble in Lithuania with a group of pro-Nazi people called the Valdemaris supporters. When does it come in the list?
Can you see 3061?
2953 PS shows that the Heydrich is passing to the defendant Ribbentrop request for financial support for these people.
Just one moment, Sir
Yes.
David, because unfortunately these documents aren't in any order.
I'm terribly sorry.
It's rather difficult to find them. If this follows after
Yes, it is.
3061 and 1439.
It follows after 3061. The next one is what I referred to in shortly, the treaty with Slovakia, 1439 should come after that. Then the next.
Yes, you're going to read 2953.
Yes, my Lord, that was what I was going to read. That's a letter from Heydrich to this defendant Ribbentrop, and it says, Dear party comrade von Ribbentrop, enclosed, please find a further report about the Valdemaris supporters. As already mentioned in the previous report, the Valdemaris supporters are still asking for help from the Reich. I therefore ask you to examine the question of financial support, brought up again by the Valdemaris supporters, set forth on page 4, paragraph 2 of the enclosed report, and to make a definite decision. The request of the Valdemaris supporters for financial support could, in my opinion, be granted. Deliveries of arms should not, however, be made under any circumstances. And then 2953 is a fuller, 2952, the next document, is a fuller report, and then at the end of that, there is added in handwriting, I support small regular payments, for example, 2,000 to 3,000 marks quarterly, signed W, who I understand to be the Secretary of State Bicycle at the Foreign Office. I merely quoted that to show the extraordinary interference even with comparatively unimportant countries. Then we pass to the aggression against Poland, and again the tribunal have had that fully dealt with by my friend Colonel Griffith Jones. But again, it might be useful if I just separated the various periods so that the tribunal would have these in mind. The first was the period of what one might call the Munich period, up to the end of September 1938. And at that time, no language was too good for Poland. The tribunal will remember the points. And the important documents showing that aspect of the case are GB 30, which is document 2357 PS, Hitler's Reichstag speech on the 20th February 1938, then GB 31, document TC 76, which is the secret Foreign Office memorandum of the 26th of August 1938, GB 27, document 73, number 40,
What number?
conversation
What's the
between
number?
Monsieur Lipsky.
What was the number?
I beg your lordship's pardon. The last one was TC 76.
Yes, but after that.
The next one was TC 73, number 40.
TC 73?
7340. 73 is the Polish White Book, my lord,
Yes.
and 40 is the number of the document in the book. That was a conversation between Monsieur Lipsky, the Polish ambassador, and this defendant. And finally, in this group, TC 73, number 42, it was Hitler's speech at the Sportspalast on the 26th of September 1938, in which he says that this is the end of his territorial problems in Europe and expresses an almost violent affection for the Poles. Now, the next stage was between Munich and the rape of Prague. And then in that stage, part of the German objective in Czechoslovakia having been accomplished, but part still remaining to be done, there is a slight change, but still a friendly atmosphere. That begins with a conversation between this defendant and Monsieur Lipsky, which is contained in Exhibit GB 27, document TC 73, number 44. There, this defendant puts forward very peaceful suggestions for the settlement of the Danzig issue. The Polish reply is in GB 28, TC 7345.
You didn't give the date of those, did you?
Yes, my lord. The first one's 25th October 1938. the Polish reply, which says that it's unacceptable that Danzig should return to the Reich, but making suggestions of a bilateral agreement, is the 31st of October 1938. Between these dates, the tribunal will remember, according to document C-137, exhibit GB-33, dated the 21st of October, the German government had made its preparations to occupy Danzig by surprise. But although these preparations were made, still some 2 months later, on the 5th of January 1939, while the rape of Prague had not taken place, Hitler was suggesting to Monsieur Beck, the Polish foreign minister, a new solution. That's contained in document TC 7348, GB 34. Interview of Hitler and Beck on the 5th of January, 1939. Then this defendant saw Monsieur Beck on the next day and said there would be no violent solution of Danzig, but a further building up of friendly relations. That's contained in GB 35, document TC 7349. Not content with that, this defendant went to Warsaw on the 25th of January, and according to the report of his speech contained in 2530 PS, GB 36, talked of the continued progress and consolidation of friendly relations, and that was capped by Hitler's Reichstag speech on the 30th of January 1939, in the same sort of terms contained in GB 37, TC 7357. That was the second stage, a mention of Danzig, but honeyed words apart from that for the Poles, because, of course, the rape of Prague had not been attained. Then one has to remember, as one comes to the summer, the meeting at the Reich Chancellery on the 23rd of May 1939, which is reported in document L79, United States Exhibit 27. It's been read many times to the tribunal, and I only remind them of it as to this point, that that's the document where Hitler makes quite clear and states in his own words, Danzig has nothing to do with the real Polish question. I have to deal with Poland because I want Lebensraum in the East. That's the effect of that portion of the document which has been read so often to the tribunal, that Danzig was merely an excuse. Now, it's important that to have in mind, if I may respectfully suggest it, that meeting was on the 23rd of May, 1939, because there is an interesting corroboration of the attitude of mind and showing how clearly this defendant Ribbentrop had adopted the attitude of mind of Hitler in the introduction to Count Ciano's diary, which that was put in as United States Exhibit 166, 2987 PS, but I don't think this part of the diary, the introduction, has been placed before the court. The tribunal, it's 29871 PS. It comes after the after the L79, which is the little Schmund file, just after the Ober-Salzburg document, the meeting of Hitler and his commanders. Set out in the trial brief, if the tribunal would care to follow it there. The Count Ciano says, in the summer of 39, Germany advanced her claim against Poland, naturally without our knowledge. Indeed, Ribbentrop had several times denied to our ambassador that Germany had any intention of carrying the controversy to extreme. Despite these denials, I remained in doubt. I wanted to make sure for myself, and on August 11th, I went to Salzburg. It was in his residence at Fürth that Ribbentrop informed me, while we were waiting to sit down at the table, of the decision to start the fireworks, just as he might have told me about the most unimportant and commonplace administrative matter. Well, Ribbentrop, I asked him while we were walking in the garden, what do you want? The corridor or dancing? Not any more. And he stared at me through those cold Musée Grevin eyes. We want war. And I remind the tribunal how closely that corroborates the statement that Hitler had made at his Chancellery Conference on the 23rd of May, that it was no longer a question of Danzig or the corridor, it was a question of war to achieve the Lebensraum in the East. Then I remind the tribunal, without citing it, that the Fall-Weiss for operation against Poland was dated the 3rd and 11th of April 1939, which certainly shows that preparations were early in hand. And then there is another reference in Count Ciano's diary, which also has not been read and which makes this point quite clear. Again, if the tribunal would take it, that is set out in the trial brief. I'll read it as it hasn't been read before. I have collected in the conference records of verbal transcripts of my conversations with Ribbentrop and Hitler. I shall only note some impressions of a general nature. Ribbentrop is evasive. Every time I ask him for particulars of the forthcoming German action, he has a guilty conscience. He has lied too many times about German intentions towards Poland, not to feel embarrassment now over what he must tell me and what he is preparing to do. The will to fight is unalterable. He rejects any solution which might satisfy Germany and prevent the struggle. I am certain that even if the Germans were given everything they demanded, they would attack just the same because they are possessed by the demon of destruction. Our conversation sometimes takes a dramatic turn. I do not hesitate to speak my mind in the most brutal manner, but this doesn't shake him in the least. I realize how little weight this view carries in German opinion. The atmosphere is icy, and the cold feeling between us is reflected in our followers. During dinner, we do not exchange a word. We distrust each other, but I at least have a clear conscience. He has not. So whatever other defects there may have been about Count Ciano, there cannot be an appreciation of a situation which is more heavily corroborated by supporting documents than his diagnosis of the situation in the summer of 1939. Then we come to the next stage, which was in the German plan, which was sharp pressure of the claim for Danzig, shown immediately after the Czechoslovakia had been finally dealt with on the 15th of March. That is shown how closely it followed the completion of the rape of Prague, that the first sharp raising of the claim was on the 21st of March, as shown in document GB 38 TC 7361. And that developed, as the tribunal has heard, from Colonel Griffiths-Jones. Then we come to the last days before the war, and one interesting sidelight is that Herr von Dirksen, the German ambassador at the court of St. James's, returned from London on the 18th of August 1939. I put in the extract from the interrogation of the defendant Ribbentrop, which is document D490. I put it in as GB 138. I don't intend to read it to the tribunal because it can be summarized. It's this, in this way, that the defendant Ribbentrop has certainly no recollection of ever having seen the German ambassador to the court of St. James's after his return. He thinks that he would have remembered him if he had seen him, and he accepts the probability that he didn't see him. And there is a point when it was well known that war with Poland would involve England and France, that either he wasn't sufficiently interested in opinion in London to take the trouble to see his ambassador, or else, as he rather suggests, he had appointed so weak an ordinary career diplomatist to London that his opinion was not taken into account either by himself or by Hitler. In either case, he was completely uninterested in anything which his ambassador might have to tell him of opinion in London or the possibility of war. And I put it, and I conceived myself to be speaking with great moderation in putting it this way, that in the last days before the 1st of September 1939, this defendant did whatever he could to avoid peace with Poland and to avoid anything which might hinder the incursion of the war which we know he wanted. He did that well knowing that war with Poland would involve Great Britain and France. These details were given in full by Colonel Griffiths-Jones. I'm not going through them again, but I have, for the convenience of the tribunal, referred to the transcript is pages 1000 to 1059, and Monsieur Lipsky summarized all what took place in his report of the 10th of October 1939, which is document TC 73-147, which is exhibit GB 27. Now, these are the actions of this defendant in the Polish matter. I now come, and I'm glad to inform the tribunal that with regard to the other countries, they're very much shorter than with regard to Poland. I now come to Norway and Denmark, I remind the tribunal of the fact of which it can take cognizance, that on the 31st of May 1939, the defendant Ribbentrop, on behalf of Germany, signed a non-aggression pact with Denmark, which provided that the German Reich and the Kingdom of Denmark will under no circumstances go to war and employ force or any other kind against one another. That is GB 77, document TC 24. And just to fix the date, the tribunal will remember that on the 7th of April 1940, the German armed forces invaded Denmark, and at the same time they invaded Norway. But with regard to Norway, there are 3 documents which show how that this defendant was fully in the earlier preparations for that act of aggression. The tribunal will remember that my friend Major Elwyn Jones did indicate with some particularity the relations between Quisling and the defendant Rosenberg. But Rosenberg, in this case also, required the help of this defendant Ribbentrop, and if the tribunal would be good enough to turn to document 957 PS, which I'm putting in as GB 139, they will see the first of the documents which connect this defendant with the earlier Quisling activities. You got it. So much. The first one is a letter, 957 PS. Try and find it. 957 PS, which is a letter from the defendant Rosenberg to this defendant. And it begins, Dear Party Comrade von Ribbentrop, Party Comrade Scheidt has returned and has made a detailed report to Councillor von Grönherr, who will address you on this subject. We agreed the other day that 200,000 to 300,000 Reichsmarks should be made immediately available for the said purpose. But it now turns out that Grönherr states that the second installment can only be made available after 8 days. But as it is necessary for Scheidt to go back immediately, I request you to make it possible that this second installment is given to him at once. With a longer absence, also, the connection with your representatives would be broken up, which just now would, under circumstances, could be very unfavorable. Everyone's interest if he goes back immediately. That was the 24th of February. Now, you found the next document. The next document is a report from Rosenberg to Hitler, and if the tribunal would be good enough to turn to page 4, this is on the Quisling activities, they will find, I think, that that passage is sufficient to show how this defendant was connected with it. At the first inset on page 4, it's document, it's the next document, 004 PS. Should be the one after 957 PS. I'm sorry.
I'm afraid I haven't found 957 PS.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's really a matter of chance whether one finds it or not. Yes, but...
Oh, good. Have you got...
Yes, but in this you...
Lord, may I pass Major Gordon's to your lordship for a moment?
Thank you.
This is the report to Rosenberg to Hitler. Apart from financial support, which was forthcoming from the Reich in currency, Quisling had also been promised shipment of material for immediate use in Norway, such as coal and sugar. Additional help was promised. The shipments were to be conducted under cover of a new trade company to be established in Germany or through specially selected existing firms when Hagelin was to act as consignee in Norway. Hagelin had already conferred with the respective ministers of the Nygaardsvold government, as for instance the Minister of Supply and Commerce, and had been assured permission for the import of coal. At the same time, the coal transports were to serve possibly to supply the technical means necessary to launch Quisling's political action in Oslo with German help. It was Quisling's plan to send a number of selected, particularly reliable men to Germany for a brief military training course in a completely isolated camp. They were then to be detailed as area and language specialists to German special troops who were to be taken to Oslo on the coal barges to accomplish a political action. Thus Quisling planned to get hold of his leading opponents in Norway, including the king, and to prevent all military resistance from the very beginning. Immediately following this political action, and upon an official request of Quisling to the government of the German Reich, the military occupation of Norway was to take place. All military preparations were to be completed previously. Though this plan contained the great advantage of surprise, it also contained a great number of dangers which could possibly cause its failure. For this reason, it received a quite dilatory treatment, while at the same time it was not disapproved as far as the Norwegians were concerned. In February, after a conference with General Field Marshal Goering, Reichsleiter Rosenberg informed the secretary in the office of the 4-year plan, Voltart, only of the intention to prepare coal shipments to Norway to the named confidant Hagelin. Further details were discussed in a conference between Voltart, Staff Director Schickendans, and Hagelin. Since Voltart received no further instructions from the General Field Marshal, Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop, after a consultation with Reichsleiter Rosenberg, consented to expedite these shipments through his office. Based on a report of Reichsleiter Rosenberg to the Führer, it was also arranged to pay Quisling 10,000 English pounds per month for 3 months, commencing on the 15th of March, to support his work. That was paid through Scheidt, the man who was mentioned before. Now, the other document, which should be the next one, I hope it is Your Lordship's copy, numbers D629. The next one should be, I hope it is, a letter from the defendant Keitel to the defendant Ribbentrop, dated the 3rd of April 1940. That is, I need only trouble the tribunal with the first sentence. The defendant Keitel says, "Dear Herr von Ribbentrop, the military occupation of Denmark and Norway has been by command of the Führer long in preparation by the High Command of the Wehrmacht. The High Command of the Wehrmacht has therefore had ample time to occupy itself with all the questions connected with the carrying out of this operation. The time at your disposal for the political preparation of this operation is, on the contrary, very much shorter. I believe myself, therefore, to be acting in accordance with your ideas in transmitting to you herewith not only those wishes of the Wehrmacht which would have to be fulfilled by the governments in Oslo, Copenhagen, and Stockholm for purely military reasons, but also, if I include a series of requests which certainly concern the Wehrmacht only indirectly, but which are, however, of the greatest importance for the fulfillment of its task. And then he proceeds to ask that the Foreign Office will get in touch with certain commanders. The important point for which I read it to the tribunal, I think, as far as I know for the first time, is that there we have the defendant Keitel saying quite clearly that the military occupation of Denmark and Norway has been long in preparation. And it is interesting when one looks back to the official life of Ribbentrop, which is contained in the archive and is document D472. I'm only quoting a sentence because of the interesting contrast. With the occupation of Denmark and Norway on 9th April 1940, only a few hours before the landing of British troops in these territories, the battle began against the Western powers. And then it goes on to Holland and Belgium. It's quite clear that whoever else had knowledge or whoever else was ignorant, this defendant, Ribbentrop, had been up to the neck in the Quisling plottings, and as it is made clear to him, well, a week before the invasion started, that the Wehrmacht and the defendant Keitel had been long in preparation of this particular act of aggression. I think, Lord, that is really all the evidence on the aggression against Norway, because, again, the story was put forward fully by my friend, Mr. Elwyn Jones.
Well, we adjourn now.
If your Lordship pleases.